Earlier this year, an author called Tony Joseph wrote a book called Early Indians. And he established how India was really populated by swaths of migrants that came out of Africa. So it's ironic today that across the world, global politics is defined by a resistance to migration, of fear of foreigners, and xenophobia. In the world today, we have 70 million people displaced, and that's the largest number since World War II. And it is defining politics in almost every corner of the globe. 54% Europeans believe that allowing migrants into their country will create an increase in terror attacks. And yet, Australia, that is a country built out of migrants, spends $4.6 billion a year just to keep about 1,600 people out of an entire continent. To discuss this matrix of fear and despair, people fleeing an entire culture of oppression and hostile societies afraid to receive them, we have Suketu Mehta, best known for his book Maximum City, but he's now written a book called This Land is My Land is Our Land, and he's described his own family's migration as well as why he's such a staunch defendant of open borders. But before we get into that conversation, just to evoke this landscape, we have a short film, and I'd like to draw your attention to the screen.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown.
None of us are as safe in our cities because of the disastrous common asylum policy. Only 20% of people want immigration to continue.
Part of the problem is nobody wants to hurt each other anymore.
شو اسمك عمو؟ انت وين ابوك؟ وين؟ وين مات؟
Move on now to the chaos, confusion, and anger growing in the wake of President Trump's immigration ban.
I'd just like to emphasize some of those facts that you just saw, that more than half of the migrants that we now call rapists, terrorists, termites, are really children. And they comprise the most innocent people running away from climate change, from oppression, from fear, hunger, conflict, and war. And Suketu is addressing all of this with a very interesting thesis where he looks at migration really as an act of reparation. So before we get into that conversation, Suketu is going to talk a little bit about his book and why he came to this and why he spent so much time writing a book on it.
Thank you, Ashoma, for that generous introduction. Thank you all for coming. So my book begins with a story that my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, who was born in Gujarat and worked all his life in colonial Kenya, he retired in London. And he was sitting in a park in Wembley in North London. And then this elderly British gent comes up to my grandfather and says, "Why are you here? Why don't you go back to your country?" And my grandfather, as a Gujarati businessman, said, "Because we are the creditors. You came to my country, you took all my gold and my diamonds, you prevented us from building up our industries, so we have come to collect. We are here because you were there." It seems to me an apt description of the reasons for global migration. These days, a great many people in the rich countries complain loudly about migration from the poor ones. But the game was rigged. First, the rich countries colonized us and stole our treasure and prevented us from building our industries. After plundering us for centuries, they left, having drawn up maps in ways that ensured permanent strife between our communities. All the stuff going on right now in Kashmir and Bangladesh can be directly attributed to lousy colonial map making. Then they brought us to their countries as guest workers, as if they know what the word guest meant in our cultures, and told us not to bring our families. Having built up their economies with our raw materials and our labor, they asked us to go back and were surprised when we did not. They stole our minerals and corrupted our governments so that their corporations could continue stealing our resources. They fouled the air above us and the waters around us, making our farms barren, our oceans lifeless. And they were aghast when the poorest among us arrived at their borders, not to steal, but to work, to clean their shit and sleep with their men. Still they needed us. They needed us to fix their computers and heal their sick and teach their kids. So they took our best and brightest, those who had been educated at the greatest expense of the struggling states they came from, and seduced us again to work for them. Now again they ask us not to come, desperate and starving, though they have rendered us, because the richest among them need a scapegoat. This is how the game is rigged today. There are 250 million people today living in a country other than the one they were born in. I'm one of them. The whole debate around global migration is framed from the viewpoint of the rich countries. How many migrants should they let in? What kind of skills they should have? What color should their skin be? But I take the point of view of the migrants themselves. Why are they moving in the first place? Not because they hate their homes or their families or their culture or their language, but because the rich countries stole the future of the poor countries through colonialism, through corporate colonialism, war, and most of all, climate change. By the middle of the century, by 2050, up to 1 billion people will be displaced by climate change. Land that is home today to 650 million people will be underwater by 2050. A full 30% of Earth, land that is home to 1.5 billion people today, will be a desert. And who's responsible? The United States is 4% of the world's population, but is responsible for fully 1/3 of the excess carbon in the atmosphere. Europe, another 1/4. The average American uses as much energy as 35 Indians or 185 Ethiopians. The US military alone emits more greenhouse gases than 140 countries. Americans bear the greatest responsibility for historical emissions, but the US was the first country to have walked away from the Paris Accords. American industries continue to emit at will because their president, or my president, Trump, believes that climate change is a Chinese-made hoax. In June, temperatures in northern India, as you know, hit 51 degrees Celsius in some parts of the country. Some 10,000 people roasted to death. A study that just came out from Stanford University last year shows that since 1960, the effect of global warming has reduced the size of India's economy by 31%, but increased the GDP of coal countries like Norway and Sweden by 10% because they could grow crops and extract minerals in areas previously covered by ice. So global warming affects different countries differently, and it hits the poorest countries most of all. Mass migration caused by climate change will be the defining human phenomenon of the 21st century. So there's an immigration panic worldwide, a backlash against this migration. The West is being destroyed not by migrants, but by the fear of migrants. In country after country, the ghosts of the fascists have rematerialized and are sitting in parliaments in Germany, Austria, Poland, Hungary. They've successfully convinced their populations that the greatest threat to their nations isn't government tyranny or inequality or climate change, but immigration. And to stop this wave of migrants, everyone's civil liberties must be curtailed. Surveillance cameras must be installed everywhere. Passports must be produced for the most routine of tasks, like buying a mobile phone. It was fear of migrants that led the British to vote for Brexit, the biggest own goal in British history. But it's not only the West that is suffering from this kind of immigration panic. It is also, and maybe to an even greater degree, India. There's a hysteria being generated today, originating in Assam, but now spreading throughout the country like a cancer, of fear and hatred of Bangladeshis, of Bengali speakers who were born here, of the Rohingya. Under the NRC fiasco in Assam, 19 lakh people are in danger of being stripped of their citizenship. The government is now proposing a system of gulags across the country to detain millions of migrant families. The Maharashtra government wants one in Navi Mumbai. This, if implemented, will shame us as a nation. The Indian public won't stand for it. The world won't stand for it. The images are going to be horrific. Children's faces behind fences and barbed wire. Even the Trump administration had to rethink its family separation policy because of the blowback. A lot of India's standing in the world, the reason we're included in the respectable nations, the reason our people and our tech companies are welcome all over the world, is that we're seen, unlike, say, China, as being a democracy that protects its minorities. Like Brexit, the detention camps, if implemented, will be a massive own goal. It's not only immoral, it's stupid policy. The Assam NRC process cost 1,220 crores and employed 52,000 government employees to produce a result that nobody is happy with. Not the Assamese, not the Bengalis, not Muslims, not Hindus. I'm sure most of you in this room have relatives living abroad or have lived abroad yourselves. We complain loudly about anti-Indian discrimination when it occurs abroad, as we should. But it's the height of hypocrisy for India to be demanding fair treatment for its migrants to other countries, like the USA and the UAE, while treating migrants to India so shabbily. We have no standing to demand protection for the Indian diaspora abroad if we persecute the Bangladeshi diaspora in India. As these stories get out, the entire Indian diaspora is in danger. There are 100,000, quote, illegal Indian immigrants living in the UK, and Britain wants to send them back. India doesn't want to take them back. If we treat Muslim migrants so badly, what do you think will happen to Indians in Muslim countries like the Gulf or Malaysia? Already, when I complain about anti-Indian bigotry in America, I get emails and tweets saying, have you looked at the country you were born in? Have you seen what they do to minorities? The fear of migrants is magnified by lies about their numbers. Politicians and racists train minds to think of them as a horde. In all the West, people, especially those who are poorly educated or right-wingers, think immigrants are a much bigger share of the population than they really are, and that they get much more government aid than they really do. A recent study found that Americans overall think that the foreign-born in the US make up 37% of the population. In reality, we are only 13%. In other words, in the American imagination, we are 3 times as numerous as we are in reality. The French think that 1 in 3 people in their country is Muslim. The actual number is 1 in 13. The British people predicted that by 2020, 22% of all British will be Muslims. The actual projection is 6%. It's the same story in India. Data from the 2011 census demonstrates that the number of Bangladeshis coming into the country is actually falling. Only 0.4% of India is foreign-born. The number of people living in India who were born outside the country fell from 6.2 million in 2001 to 5.3 million in 2011. And that dreaded Bangladeshi horde, there were actually 780,000 fewer Bangladeshis in that period living in India. Don't believe the WhatsApp rumors. There's nowhere close to 20 million Bangladeshis in India. The true figure, according to the census, is around 1/10 of that number. When countries safeguard the rights of their minorities, they also safeguard, as a happy side effect, the rights and economic well-being of their majorities or other minorities within the majority. If a judiciary forbids discrimination against, say, Muslims, it's also much more likely to forbid discrimination against, say, gays or women. The obverse is also true. When they don't safeguard the rights of their minorities, every other citizen's rights are in peril. Every majority is composed of a set of discrete minorities. When you go after Palestinians and Africans in Israel, the Reform Jews are next. When you go after Muslims and Mexicans in America, the Jews and gays are next. When you go after Muslims in India, the Christians and Sikhs are next. The early targets are easy to hit under the cover of nationalism, but hate, once fed, grows ever more ravenous. Its belly is never full. It is never satisfied after the first sacrifice. Referring to migrants as termites, as Amit Shah did with Bangladeshi migrants, harks back to Nazi descriptions of Jews as vermin. These are human beings, not insects. They have children, they have parents, they have a favorite song and a way they like to comb their hair. They are capable of love and anguish. No human being is a termite. No human being is illegal. Bhai bhasha jara sambhali ne vaparsho. I spent a lot of Maximum City reporting on the divisions created in this city by the 92-93 riots and bomb blasts. I wrote about how they created walls between Hindus and Muslims, walls which exist to this day. And now these walls have spread all over the country. The BJP claims it's not anti-Muslim, but on issue after issue, whether it's the NRC or Kashmir, the proposed citizenship bill, which pointedly excludes Muslims, or the impunity with which mobs get away with lynchings, Muslims are being made to feel that this is not their country. It's not just a matter of this or that policy. It's the language that the government uses about them, the deliberate affronts to their sensitivities. And not just the government. It's widely shared by the people that elected the government. It's a terrible idea to otherize Indian Muslims. They're as Indian as you or me, whoever you are. No Hindu has the right to tell any Muslim or Sikh or Christian or atheist that he or she is not Indian. India is not a Hindu country, just like the US is not a Christian country. Deal with it. Every Hindu is part Muslim. Every Indian Muslim is part Hindu, and part Christian, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain. Both of my grandfathers were members of the RSS. But they had intimate knowledge of Islam, of their dress, their food, their culture. The purest language is Persian, my RSS-loving grandfather in Calcutta declared. He had bigoted ideas about Islam, but when, during partition, a Hindu mob came into his shop after a Muslim who'd run there for shelter, my grandfather held off the mob at gunpoint. "This man is my guest, and you'll have to kill me before you kill him," he said. This is the wonder of being Indian. We are individually multiple. It is this multiplicity that's under severe threat today, the greatest threat I've known in my life. The language about minorities, particularly Muslims, in the press, in parliament, is approaching incitement to genocide. In 1947, 30 million Indian Muslims voted with their feet. They stayed in India. Today we are the world's second largest Muslim nation. There are no Indian members of ISIS or Al-Qaeda. There's no active jihadist movement apart from a few fringe groups. Not yet. But what we're doing is sowing these seeds of hatred which will grow into the weeds of terror. I reported on the Bombay blasts of '93, a horrific act of terror in which hundreds of people, both Muslims and Hindus, lost their lives. These were despicable acts. But the members of the underworld who planted them said they were retaliation for the anti-Muslim riots a few months ago. Middle-class Muslims said to me, we weren't able to look people in the eyes in the trains during the riots. After the bomb blast, we could raise our heads again. It was for them a matter of dignity. Even if you don't like certain aspects of Islam, I'm appealing to simple self-interest. Can we really afford to alienate 200 million Indian Muslims? This will cause a civil war, which will make partition look like a schoolyard brawl. A battle is being fought today in the public squares, at political conventions, on the television, in the opinion pages, a battle of storytelling about migrants and Muslims. Stories have power, much more power than cold numbers. That's why Trump won the election. That's why Orban in Hungary, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Duterte in the Philippines won power. A populist is, above all, a gifted storyteller, and recent elections across the world illustrate the power of populism, a false narrative, a horror story about the other, well told. The only way it can be fought is with a true story, better told. I teach journalism, and the great gift of American journalism in the world is fact-checking. When I write for the New Yorker or the New York Times, and even for Condé Nast Traveler or GQ, there are people who go over every line, call up every source I quote to make sure I've quoted them correctly, check every number. They save me from my worst mistakes. For my new book, I hired a professional fact-checker to challenge me, and I have 50 pages of footnotes that back up the text. It's this kind of fact-checking that can bust the phony narratives of immigration panic, like the ones you see spouting from the mouth of opinion pundits in the US and Indian television. Imagine if they had a fact-checker. The Republic might never recover. Because it's a contest of storytelling. The sworn enemies of the populists are people like me, journalists, writers, truth-tellers. This is why all over the populist world, in America, Russia, India, there's a war against the free press. All over the world, writers are being attacked, imprisoned, censored like never before. Their funding threatened, their taxes audited, their university jobs taken away. In most countries, at most times, writers are defenseless. We are the easiest to attack because words are not bulletproof. We don't have a vote bank. We don't command blind loyalty from our followers. We question and urge our readers to question. We are soft targets. But tyrants and religious fanatics, be warned. We will become more powerful each time, and our words will outlast your mobs. Threaten us, and we will sing the truth louder. Imprison us, and others will take up our chants. Kill us, and we will come back with 10 new heads. But as a writer, such attacks come with the territory. In America, I got attacked for being insufficiently American. In India, for being insufficiently Indian. I was born in Calcutta, raised in Bombay, and grew up in New York. I'm an overseas citizen of India. I'm also a US citizen. My early writing was a constant search for home. Was it in India or America? Or in any of the other places I've lived, England, France, Brazil? I searched for home for a very long time, and then I found it. I'm a writer, but a very rich writer. I have made so much money from my books that I live in a palace. But I have roommates. I share it with many, many people, fascinating people, each one of them. Since I am so rich, my home has many rooms, and I feel free to move among its chambers, balconies, balustrades, turrets, dungeons, courtyards, gardens, fountains. The gardens are filled with songbirds of every hue, the fountains with iridescent fish darting this way and that. There is music playing in every room of my home, and dances in the grand ballrooms. There is nothing else in the whole universe like it. It is painted in beautiful shades of blue and green. My home is a palace, but the thing about it is, it's your home too. I am the owner of this palace, but so are you, and so are the waiters bringing you coffee, and so is the rickshawala outside. It belongs to everyone and no one. It belongs to you and it belongs to me. It is called the earth. Thank you.
Well, that doesn't leave much room for conversation, so thank you, Suketu. It would have been good to maybe argue a little bit from the other perspective, so it helps clarify people's confusions about the issue, because there are those in areas where there are lots of migration who feel threatened by it, and it would be good to probe that rather than merely diss it. I mean, when Hillary Clinton said they're the basket of deplorables, you lose other people's genuine emotion, and it's good to converse with that rather than merely outlaw it. But we don't have time. I'd just like to share a very interesting statistic that Yuval Harari wrote about in his book Homo Deus, where he spoke about the fact, and it's interesting because Mexico is such a fault line now in American politics, that when the Spanish came to Mexico in 1520, Mexico was a very rich country with 22 million people, and they brought the plague to Mexico. And in 9 months, Mexico lost 9 million people, and they were down to 6 million people. When the British came to India, we were 22% of the world's GDP. When they left, we were 2%. So today, when those countries refuse to take migrants, Suketu's central thesis comes into force, which is that these societies are really paying, and it's a reparation for a long cyclical history that they set into motion. But unfortunately, we've run out of time, and there isn't time to explore this further. But thank you for listening. We hope that the film made some impact, and do read Suketu's book to get another perspective on this. Thank you so much.